When I was 17 in 1958, my father, Fred, owned a cake shop and he made pies and cakes, and so he wore a white apron, and you knew he was going to talk seriously if he took his apron off. And he called his apron my badge of servitude. And Fred, one day when I was 17, took his apron off and he asked me what I was going to be when I grew up. And I said I didn't know, which was pretty depressing. And he said, well, Hughie, look to your strengths. What's your strong suit? And I said, well, I've got 5. I can tap dance, I can play the trumpet, I can sort soft drink bottles, I can quote poetry, and I can make meat pies. And Dad said, well then, son, you're very well equipped for Australia's future. Very soon after that, the electric guitar, soft drink cans, rock and roll, hamburgers, and reality television arrived. And so I was on the way out. I think the only thing I can tell you for sure about your future is that throughout your working life, you'll be pleasantly surprised how many times you will recall in certain situations what your teachers and your parents told you. You don't think you will, but you will. It'll all come back. And you'll realise they were not as well educated as you are, that they were smart. You know, I was a journalist on the newspaper and thought I knew everything, and Dad was making meat pies and he said, I know how newspapers work. And I thought, God, what would Dad know? And he said, you write them up and then you write them down. And that's the truest thing you could say about a newspaper. And my mother, when it came to voting, she always said, you put the lion in and the tiger out. But I was 13 when I learnt my most valuable lesson. In those days, they had a big examination for everyone who was 13. It was called State Scholarship, run by the state. And it was a public exam where you got locked in a room with supervisors and you had to answer all these maths and English questions and history and geography. And if you didn't pass, you couldn't go to secondary school. Now, the problem was the state government in 1954, when I did it, hadn't built a new secondary school for 25 years. So they couldn't afford to let too many people pass. And so 40% used to fail state scholarship. But I was very happy when our teacher, Sister Vincent, who used to walk around with a big cane and made us come to school on Saturday morning, and she said, I have never had a failure in state scholarship. So I thought, you beauty, I'm right. And then the day before the exam, she called me out and said, Hugh Lunn, I'm not nominating you for state scholarship. And I said, why not? And she said, well, I haven't had a failure and I don't want to start with you. So when I arrived at the Mary Immaculate Convent age 4, I was taught by a really old nun called Sister James, who taught me how to write 2 and how to say 3 by touching my finger, 3, instead of tree. And she heard this, and so she came wandering across the big boys' playground, shuffling slowly, the rosary beads rattling, her crucifix like a dagger in her black belt. And she came across and said, I'm going to tell you something, Hughie, which you must remember all your life. She said, nominate yourself. And so I did. I nominated myself. And it was the days of where we used to dip the pen in the inkwell and then write half a word and dip it in again and write the other half. There were no biros there. And she gave me her fountain pen and said, no one who has ever used this pen has failed state scholarship. And so I took it, and then she pulled out, Catholics were very big on holy medals of saints and people, and she pulled out one and started pinning it to my shirt collar, and I said, what saint is that? And it was the Saint Jude, and I'd heard of St Anthony and St Joseph and lots of saints, but never St Jude. I said, who's that? And she said, the patron saint of hopeless causes. And the Lord moves in mysterious ways, because there were 400 marks in state scholarship and I passed by 1. And if I hadn't, I wouldn't have got to go to secondary school, I wouldn't be here today, and I wouldn't have gone around the world writing stories. So thank you, Sister James. And Sister James' advice to nominate myself or yourself, I remembered it had helped me many times in life. When I was 47 years old, I had written 4 books, and they'd done quite well, and I wanted to write one about my childhood growing up. And I went to 3 different publishers, and they all recoiled in horror when I said I wanted to write a book about my childhood. They said, no, anything but childhood. Everyone writes about their childhood. And I said, what do you mean? They said, they're boring. Mum and dad and teachers. No, don't write a book. And so no one would give me a contract. And I was Rupert's bureau chief for the Australian newspaper, and I'd been there 17 years, and I resigned, and with no contract or any prospect of getting it published, I went home and wrote Over the Top with Jim. And it was published in 1989, and amazingly, it's still for sale in shops today and is the biggest selling book ever written about an Australian childhood. So don't ask me how it happened or why, but it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't nominated myself. And one of the wondrous things about capturing the past as you write is you suddenly see how much things have changed. You know, even the language. When I was young, a mobile was a macrame decoration that hung from a piece of string and blew in the breeze. And mooning over a girl, well, that was something nice and romantic. And a stimulus package was a 17-year-old girl. And, you know, things were so different that when you went, it was illegal to take alcohol to a dance in Australia when I was going to Queensland University, age 19. Because I went to, they don't have it anymore, I don't think, the Freshers' Ball. Do they still have Freshers' Ball? I went, and I was young and naive, and a bloke came running over to me and said, hold this, and I held it. I thought, what's that? It's in a brown paper bag. It felt really hard and it was flat. And I pulled it out to look, and there was a bottle of Bundaberg rum, and there was a big policeman standing over the top of it. And I was arrested. So it was certainly a different place. You know, you can't own a firearm now, but when we were 13, it was compulsory to join the Army School Cadets. And the first thing you got when you joined was a .303 rifle, which was taller than I was when I was 13. And I used to take it to school once a week on the tram. And nobody ran for cover. And we had to do a 2-week camp at Greenbank Army Camp in tents and slept on a palliasse. A palliasse is a hessian bag filled with straw. And we marched around and officers yelled orders at us in that incomprehensible army language. And we had to fire Vickers machine guns and mortar bombs and Bren guns. And I always remember something another teacher told me, Brother Hodder, because this was a Christian Brothers school. Brother Hodder, there were 350 cadets, and we were shooting all these weapons, and he called us all together and said, boys, kill no birds, touch no nests. And I don't know why he said that. We were killing everything that moved. Humans were the only thing we were allowed to kill. For some reason, I was never promoted in my 4 years as a cadet. But in my final year, I thought, what would Sister James have said? She would have said, promote yourself. So I went into town to Queen Street and into Allen and Stark's and bought a set of sergeant stripes and some Durex tape. And one night in the army camp at about 9 p.m, I got out the sergeant stripes and put them on my arm and stuck them down. And I emerged from my tent and strutted down through the long rows of tents in the dark, and I felt a surge of power and authority I'd never felt before. And so I went looking for someone to give orders to. And I came across 100 first-year cadets lined up in threes, and I thought, okay, this is what I've got to do. And I said, ha-te-ha! And everyone went. I said, Boliv, quick, huh. And they all marched off. I was amazed. And after we'd gone about a mile, I thought, what do I do now? We're really in the sticks. We're heading out towards Ipswich. And so, but I thought, the army knows what it's doing. I said, how about, huh? Quick, huh? And marched them back to the camp. So, you know, one of the things I learnt then was, if you're going to do something, speak in the voice of your masters.